one night, one betrayal, one decision that changed everything. What would you do if you found out your father had been lying to your family for years? My name is Daniel Foster, and last Christmas Eve, I thought I'd finally have a peaceful night. The fire crackled beside me, the scent of cinnamon and pine lingered in the air, and my hot cocoa, filled with those tiny marshmallows that melt just right, warmed my hands. For the first time in years, there was no shouting, no forced smiles, no chaos. Then, just as I took another sip, the front door slammed open so hard I thought the hinges might snap. Like, I didn't even have to look. I already knew who it was. Nathan, my brother. He stood there, panting, his face red from the cold or maybe from sheer rage. His coat hung open, snow melting on the shoulders, and his fists were clenched like he was ready to throw a punch. Behind him, his wife Sophie had her arms crossed, her face a tight mask of frustration. "We're celebrating here from now on, Nathan declared like he was issuing a royal decree. I took another slow sip of my cocoa. "Hope you brought a tent." The color drained from his face. Sophie inhaled sharply, bracing herself. I set my mug down, leaned back inside. Something tells me this isn't just a friendly Christmas visit. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, looking like he was about to explode. "I walked in on Dad." His voice wavered. He was screwing some woman, half Mom's age, in their house, on Christmas Eve. The room fell silent, except for the fire crackling in the background. Sophie rubbed her temples. "Your mom lost it," Nathan continued, screaming, throwing things, crying. "And Dad? That bastard just stood there, making excuses." His voice dropped lower. "Then she kicked us all out, even me and Sophie." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. "She told me I had a choice," he said, his voice bitter. "Either support her or go live with Dad." My stomach twisted. Our mother wasn't one for empty threats. "So we grabbed what we could and left," Nathan finished. "And since you're the only one with the house big enough," I exhaled slowly, "and you didn't think to call first?" Nathan threw up his hands. "I was dealing with a family crisis, Daniel," Sophie finally spoke. "We'll sleep on the floor if we have to," she said quietly. I can't go to a hotel right now. My wallet was in my bag was in the living room, and I wasn't about to walk back in there while your mom was throwing wine glasses at your dad's head." I pressed my fingers against my temples. This was a lot to process. "All right," I muttered. "Fine. But you're explaining all this to my wife." Nathan nodded. Then, just as I was about to shut the door, headlights appeared in my driveway. My stomach sank. I already knew who it was. Mom. Her eyes were swollen, her face red with anger, exhaustion, betrayal. Her knuckles gripped the steering wheel so tight I could see them from where I stood. And just like that, I knew. Christmas Eve had only just begun. Mom didn't even bother turning off the engine. She shoved the door open and stepped out, her boots crunching against the snow. She was still wearing the navy dress she'd worn to dinner earlier, but now there was a red stain on the front. Wine, maybe, or something worse. Her mascara was smudged, her hair a mess. She looked at Nathan first, then Sophie, then me. "Are you gonna let me in?" she said, her voice raw from hours of screaming, "or do I have to stand out here all night?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she owned the place, brushing past Nathan without so much as a glance. Sophie stayed near the door, watching but not moving. Mom made a beeline for the kitchen. I followed, half expecting her to grab a bottle of wine, but instead she yanked open the fridge, grabbed the orange juice, and poured herself a glass with shaking hands. Nathan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" She let out a dry laugh. "Oh, you mean besides your father screwing some 20-year-old in my house? Besides the fact that my own son just stood there while I had to throw him out like the rest of the garbage?" Nathan flinched. "Mom?" She held up a hand. "Save it. I don't want your excuses. You just sat there, Nathan. You watched. You didn't say a damn thing until I was the one who had to tell him to get out." Nathan's fists clenched. "I was in shock. I didn't know what to do." "You should have done something," she snapped, slamming her palm against the counter. "You should have stood up for me. You should have told him what a disgusting piece of trash he is." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I did, Mom. After you kicked us out, I told him he was a selfish bastard, that he destroyed everything, that I'd never forgive him." Mom stared at him, breathing hard, then she turned her gaze to me. "And you?" she asked, her voice quieter but no less sharp. "Did you know?" I froze. Because the truth was, I did. Not the details, not who she was, not that it would happen on Christmas Eve of all nights. But I'd seen the signs, the late night calls, the sudden business trips, the way Dad started dressing better, wearing cologne he never used before, the way he and Mom barely spoke anymore. I had my suspicions, I just never said anything. Mom's expression hardened. She let out a bitter laugh. Of course you knew. Nathan turned to me sharply. Wait, you knew? Sophie's eyes widened. Oh, God. I swallowed hard. I didn't know for sure. But you thought it was possible, Mom cut in, her voice ice cold. I rubbed the back of my neck. Yeah. The silence was thick, suffocating. Then Mom did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not a real smile, a bitter, hollow one. You know what's funny? She said, I was going to come here and tell you both that I was done, that I was leaving him, that I wasn't going to waste another second of my life on that man. She grabbed her purse off the counter, straightened her shoulders. But now I realize I don't have anyone left in this family I can trust. The words hit harder than a slap to the face. Mom, Nathan started. Save it. Her voice cracked. I'm done. She turned toward the door, gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Sophie finally spoke, her voice soft. Where are you going? Mom reached for the doorknob. Anywhere but here. And just like that, she walked out into the cold, leaving all of us standing there, speechless. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the faint crackling of the fireplace. Then Nathan swore under his breath and grabbed his coat. I'm going after her. Sophie shot him a look. Nathan, it's freezing out there. I don't care, he snapped, already heading toward the door. She shouldn't be alone right now. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. She's not thinking straight. She just needs time to cool down. Nathan turned on me, his face still flushed with anger. Time? Time for what? To decide whether or not she wants to talk to us again? You heard what she said. She doesn't trust us anymore. Well, what do you want me to do, Nathan? I shot back, my voice rising. I can't change the past. I didn't know for sure, and even if I did, what was I supposed to do? Tell her and ruin everything even sooner? Nathan let out a humorless laugh. Oh yeah, God forbid we ruined Christmas a few months earlier. Sophie sighed, stepping between us. Guys, stop. This isn't helping. Nathan shook his head, then turned back toward the door. I'm going after her. Before anyone could stop him, he stormed out into the cold night, the door slamming behind him. I exhaled, pressing my fingers against my temples. This is a disaster. Sophie crossed her arms, her face tense. You really didn't think to tell anyone? Not even Nathan? I gave her a tired look. Would it have changed anything? She didn't answer. The room fell into silence. Then my phone buzzed. I frowned, pulling it out of my pocket. Dad? Sophie saw the name on the screen and tensed. You're not seriously going to answer that, are you? I hesitated, then against my better judgment, swiped to accept the call. Hello? There was silence for a moment, then Dad's voice came through, low and hoarse. She's gone. My stomach sank. What? Dad exhaled shakily. Your mother. She left. She took the car and just drove off. My pulse quickened. Sophie's eyes widened. What is it? I held up a hand, focusing on Dad's voice. What do you mean she left? I mean, she packed a bag, grabbed the keys, and took off, Dad said, his voice unsteady. She didn't say where she was going, just that she was done. She said she never wanted to see me again. I swallowed hard. Dad let out a bitter laugh. I deserve that, don't I? I didn't answer. Listen, Dad continued. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from her, but she's out there and I don't know where she went, and it's Christmas Eve. I need to know she's safe. A knot formed in my stomach. For all the terrible things he had done, for all the pain he had caused, he was still my father. And Mom was out there alone in the middle of the night with no one knowing where she went. I had a choice to make. And I knew, no matter what, things were never going to be the same again. The moment I ended the call, I knew I was making a mistake. But it was too late to back out now. Sophie was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. You're really gonna help him? I sighed, rubbing my temples. Sophie, Mom is out there alone in the middle of winter. I don't give a damn about Dad right now. I just need to find her. She folded her arms. And if he shows up, if he tries to talk his way back in, I didn't have an answer for that. Sophie exhaled sharply. Fine, but I'm coming with you. We grabbed our coats and I grabbed my keys. As we stepped out onto the icy driveway, Nathan was nowhere to be seen. His footprints trailed down the snow-covered sidewalk, disappearing into the dark. I tried calling him. No answer. I tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. I muttered a curse under my breath. Where the hell did they go? Sophie shivered beside me. Where would your mom go when she's upset? I thought for a moment. Then it hit me. The lake house. We drove in silence, the roads empty except for the occasional passing car. The lake house wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes away, but in this weather, it felt like an eternity. I gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white, my mind racing through every possibility. What if Mom was there? What if she wasn't? What if Nathan found her first? What if Dad did? Sophie was the first to break the silence. What are you going to say to her? I shook my head. I don't know. I just want her to know she's not alone. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. We turned onto the long, winding road that led to the lake house. The snow-covered trees cast eerie shadows in the headlights. As we got closer, I spotted 2 cars already parked outside, Nathan's and Mom's. Sophie and I exchanged a glance before stepping out into the cold. The wind bit at my face as I trudged toward the cabin. The lights were on inside. Someone was there. I knocked once, no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The door swung open. Nathan stood there, his face flushed from the cold, or maybe from whatever argument had just taken place. His eyes were wild, his jaw tight. She's inside, he muttered. I stepped past him and saw her. Mom sat on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket, staring into the dying fireplace. She looked so small, so lost. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mom? She didn't look at me. You shouldn't have come. I hesitated, then sat down across from her. Neither should you. She let out a weak laugh, but there was no humor in it. I just needed to get away. I glanced at Nathan. What happened? He sighed, rubbing his face. She won't come home. She says she's done. Sophie, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. Can you blame her? Nathan shot her a glare, but didn't argue. I turned back to Mom. Where will you go? For the first time, she met my eyes. I don't know. I just know I can't stay there anymore. A painful silence settled between us. Then another car pulled up outside. My stomach dropped. We all knew who it was before we even saw him. Dad. The front door swung open and there he was, Dad. He looked different. His usual confidence, his smooth talking charm, all of it was gone. He looked exhausted, defeated. His coat was dusted with snow, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Mom, who still sat on the couch, wrapped in her blanket. She stiffened. Nathan took a step closer to her, like he was ready to shield her if necessary. Sophie didn't move. Dad's voice was quiet, hesitant. Can we talk? Mom let out a bitter laugh. Talk? Now you want to talk? Dad swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're damn right you don't. Nathan cut in, his voice sharp with anger. Dad turned to him. I understand if you hate me. Both of you. He looked at me. But this isn't about me, it's about her. His eyes shifted back to Mom. I just needed to see you, to make sure you're okay. Mom shook her head, gripping the blanket tighter. You don't get to do this, Robert. You don't get to act like the concerned husband now, not after what you did. Dad's face twisted with guilt. I know. I ruined everything. I betrayed you, I hurt you, and I'll never be able to take it back. Mom's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why? Dad clenched his jaw, looked away. I don't know, Nathan scoffed. Bullshit. Dad ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging. I wish I had some grand excuse, some reason that would make sense, but the truth is, I was selfish. I was stupid, and I destroyed the one thing that actually mattered. Mom let out a shaky breath. Did you love her? Dad flinched. No. Mom's lip trembled. Then why? Why was she worth throwing away 35 years? Dad's face crumpled. She wasn't. Silence. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. Nathan looked away. Mom wiped at her eyes, sniffling. You need to leave. Dad hesitated, then nodded slowly. He turned to Nathan and me. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I hope one day you'll understand. Nathan's expression was stone cold. I won't. Dad looked at me. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. He nodded like he already knew my answer. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out into the cold. We listened as his car started, as the tires crunched against the snow, as the engine faded into the distance. Mom let out a long breath, her entire body shaking. Sophie sat down beside her, squeezing her hand. Nathan stood by the fireplace, his jaw tight. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process everything. We stayed at the lake house that night. Nobody said much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, thick with exhaustion, grief, and everything left unsaid. I barely slept. None of us did. I kept thinking about Mom, sitting on that couch, staring into the fire like she was trying to find answers in the embers. I kept thinking about Dad, walking out into the cold, his shoulders hunched like a man who had lost everything. And I kept thinking about what came next. Morning came slow. The sun rose, but the gray sky made it feel like it was still night. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. Mom was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, making coffee like it was any other day. Nathan sat at the table, staring into his mug. Sophie was beside him, rubbing his arm gently. Mom looked at us both, exhaled. "I'm going to file for divorce." Nathan nodded. "Good." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What do you need from us?" She smiled sadly. "Just to know I'm not alone." And for the first time in a long time, I knew she wasn't. None of us were. Christmas was different that year. No big family dinner, no presents under the same tree, no pretending everything was perfect, but somehow, despite everything, it felt real. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And some stories don't end with a neat little bow. Sometimes the holidays aren't filled with joy and laughter, but with hard truths and broken illusions. This Christmas wasn't about gifts or traditions. It was about facing reality, about loss, and about rebuilding from the ashes of betrayal. But in the end, what mattered wasn't the past. It was the people who chose to stand by each other, even in the wreckage. Life doesn't always give us the endings we expect, but it does give us choices. Choices to heal, to move forward, to redefine what family means. And sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most honest beginnings. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life narratives. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we expect, they're the ones we need to hear.